Okay, so we'll get started now. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sophie O'Keefe and I'm the Professional Development Manager at English Australia. It's my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of our Action Research in ELICOS Colloquium. This colloquium runs over 3 days, and during the event, teachers who took part in the 2020 Action Research in ELICOS program will present their research projects. The theme for this year's program was investigating online teaching and learning, and all of the teachers will be presenting research into different perspectives of this theme. Before we kick off with the first researcher's presentation, I'd just like to especially thank our partners in the Action Research in ELICOS program, Cambridge Assessment English. We've been running this program for 11 years now, and Cambridge have been our partners since its inception. So thank you very much, Cambridge. I'd also like to thank Anne Burns, who's the key academic reference person for the program and who's also here today. Lovely to have you with us, Professor Anne Burns. So just before we get started, I'd like to introduce Marcus Maculaitis, who works for Cambridge Assessment English, to say a few words on behalf of them. Marcus, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Yeah, hi everybody and welcome. And also for everybody that was here yesterday, welcome back. I'd again like to say on behalf of Cambridge Assessment English that we're really happy to continue our partnership to bring this action research program to teachers in Australia. As Sophie said, it's been quite a number of years. Actually, this is the 11th year that Cambridge Assessment has been involved in the program. And like everyone attending today, we're really looking forward to hearing more about all of this year's participants' research over today and also tomorrow. Now, I'd like to introduce our first presenter for today, Paul Williams, to share his action research with us. Paul is an ELICOS senior teacher at CQUEnglish in Melbourne, so please join me in welcoming Paul. Over to you.
Paul, I think you're still on mute.
Unmute. Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so, you know, the first time that I taught students how to prepare an academic research presentation was about 15 years ago when I was working for RMIT in Vietnam. However, the first time that I've ever done it online was in 2020 with CQUEnglish. And as I started to think about how I'd approach this with my students, and I was starting the Action Research program, I thought that would be a really interesting focus for me to investigate, is how to support students by scaffolding activities and building their confidence in order to present online. So that's what I'm going to be presenting about today. Can't seem to, there we go. Okay, so today my presentation is organised into 3 main sections. I'll start by giving a bit of background information about my own context and the students that were in the program. I'll also introduce the research questions that I developed. Then I'll move into the first iteration, which was really more like a pilot for me, where I'll explain a little bit about what I did in terms of getting an idea of how confident the students were, and I'll show some of what the students were expressing in their reflections and some of the feedback that they provided with a specific focus on collaboration. Then I'll go into the second iteration where I'll be talking a little bit about task-based learning, which came from that first iteration, and I'll show you some of the discourse from their interaction in some of these tasks. There we go. So let's start with background. The two classes were EAP3 classes, which at our centre is an approximate common European framework of B2 plus, or if you're more familiar with IELTS, it's about a 6.0 entry with an approximate 6.5 exit. The first iteration began in May, and then that class finished in July. And then there was a bit of a break before I started the second class, which began in August and just finished recently, in fact, just two weeks ago. The two speaking assessments that these classes have to prepare for is a seminar discussion in the first half of the course, and then an oral presentation in the second half based on a research report. And there will be some question and answer at the end of that too. So the first group that I had, we had 7 students studying entirely online. The second group was a smaller class, only 4 students, but in total 8 different nationalities. To describe the students, I would say they were very motivated. They were all, I think most of them, not all, working part-time as well as studying full-time. And then they were going into 3 main streams for their masters, either engineering, IT, and we had 1 student that was going into linguistics. Okay. There we go. It's just a little bit hard to see. The platforms we were using, Zoom was our virtual classroom, so that's where we did most of the lesson delivery. Moodle was used only for independent learning, so teachers don't really post information in Moodle for students, whereas we use Google Drive or Microsoft Teams as a more collaborative online tool with delivering lesson content or materials. Okay, still getting used to, there we go. So the 2 questions that I had, the first one was, how can scaffolding activities increase students' confidence in preparing for an online presentation? And the second being, which activities do they prefer? Because I guess I wanted to make sure that the students were motivated and engaged. Looking at the first iteration, one of the first things that I did was design a survey, because I wanted to know a little bit about what their needs were. So were they more confident in their language or more confident in their digital literacy? I was a little surprised to see how confident they were. Even the engineers and the linguists they were pretty competent users. And I think that also showed when I started teaching them that they really had pretty good skills at working across different platforms. However, the area that they were least confident in was essentially their language skills, so vocabulary and discourse. And that made me think about what I needed to focus on in my lessons. Not so much the speaking skills, general speaking skills, as much as it was trying to boost their language skills and especially vocabulary. The next thing that I did was look at our program and think about which week the students needed to be practicing what kind of skills, because they don't actually finish their research until about week 8. So it's a bit of a waste of time if we're doing activities and then that are focused more on content when in fact they're not really ready to present until week 8. So in week 6, I started to think about ways in which I could design activities that would build in some of the language and speaking skills so that when it came to later on in the course, they'd be confident in presenting. However, while they were doing these activities, I was also giving them reflections, usually before the activities rather than at the end of the week. So the purpose for that was to find out what I could prioritize in my classroom. Now, two things that weren't surprising. Practice was one of the things that they continually referred to. They wanted lots of opportunities for practice. And perhaps because I had done that survey on confidence, a lot of them mentioned their either lack of confidence or wanting to build on their confidence. But the one thing that stuck out that I'd never really mentioned and I thought was a little bit interesting was this desire to work collaboratively, because they were preparing for an individual presentation. So why would they want to do things collaboratively? But then I looked in a little bit more detail at what the students were saying. And you can see here, these are some of the comments that they, or some of the things that they wrote in their reflections. So they referred to wanting to share information with each other, wanted to work, they wanted to work in the breakout rooms with their friends. So they're not just saying classmates down here. I want to ask my friends whether they understand my presentation. They wanted to practice their speaking, not so much with the teacher as much as it is with other students. And then finally, they wanted to give feedback to each other, so peer feedback. Then I started to reflect on my own teaching and thinking about how I could meet what the students were wanting and what they really needed. And two things stuck out for me, and that was I wanted to include more communicative approaches and in particular task-based approaches in my lesson delivery, because I felt that I was doing too much of the talking. There was a bit too much TTT. And I wanted students to be able to interact a lot more. The second thing was that sort of matched with what the students were saying is that I felt that the students would be more supported if they're not just getting feedback from the teacher, but also from their peers. So for the second iteration, what I did is designed a series of tasks, and I'll show you some of what the students did, as well as some of the language that came from these tasks. So the first task was building a bridge, and we had done something similar to this in face-to-face classes, and I was thinking, how can I bring Realia into the classroom across the screen? And so I thought of a creative way. I wanted them to build a bridge. They had 30 minutes to use materials that are either in their house or in their room. And this is an example of one of the bridges that the students built in just 30 minutes. And as well, this student was not the engineer. He was an IT specialist. I'll just show you a quick video of this student presenting his bridge. And listen to some of the language that he's using as he's presenting.
A structure will distribute the weight through all the columns with one wall. And to keep together the structure, we use this very organic mass, which is made of corn flour.
Ah,
okay, you can see something.
Oh, I love it.
It's yellow corn flour. What else? Okay, of course, the bolts and all the structure is made out of pasta, so only concern is about the weather. If it rains too much, it may fall. A structure will...
Okay, so when we look at the actual words the students are using, one thing that stuck out to me was there were some words that I wouldn't have expected or perhaps pre-taught if I was doing a lesson about building bridges. But it really drew out some language from the students. So distribute the weight, columns, organic mass, bolts. These were some of the more academic language that the student was using. But in reflecting on what I would do differently with this task, I still hadn't really achieved my main goal, which was to include some collaboration. And because the students were doing this individually in their own bedroom, and it was hard to sort of think of a way where they could perhaps do that as a pair or as a group. And I felt that my instructions could be improved because they didn't really produce much language. When they were sharing their bridge, it only went for about 2 minutes for each student. So in terms of efficacy, in terms of the 30 minutes that they used to prepare the bridge, and only getting sort of 6 minutes of English language production out of it, it didn't seem to be particularly productive. So I thought of a new task where the students could actually be collaborating together. And one of the things that I really loved about it was the complexity of the language. On the right-hand side, you can see the advertisement that they had created. And some of the technical language that they were using in the advertisement. They put this ad together in about 2 hours, and there was a lot of interaction. It was really authentic language that came from it and very descriptive. So to have a look at some of the language that came out, for instance, for confirming information, in purple, you can see the sort of suggestions that they were coming up with. And at one stage, one student said, "We can sell drinks." And the other student said rings and was a little bit confused. He tried to clarify and he says, well, or maybe just a food item. But then the student confirms again, sorry, I didn't get it. What was that? And then the student says new food items. And at that stage, student one realizes, oh, right, we're talking about food, not rings. And the second aspect here was the student actually, as he was thinking about another item, a food item, chips, he sort of uses a rhetorical question for himself to think about chips. What was it called? Another student says hygienic, right? Hygienic chips. But clearly student 3 doesn't agree with that. He's still searching for this word. He says chips not cooked in oil. In the end, he never really finds the word that he's looking for. I think he's looking for baked chips, but he comes up with a word that's just as useful, I guess, which is multigrain chips. To take another perspective though, the technical language that came out, they were not only using technical language, but in different word forms. So certification, certified IPX10, no, and then he changes the word for it, the word order, IPX10 certified. And then there's a lot of repetition. You can see the same thing happens here with Gorilla Glass 6 protection. And then Gorilla Glass 6 what? Protected. We could write protected. Continues on to the next page. And towards the end, they start to get to what they really wanted to say, which is protected by Gorilla Glass. So there's a lot of reformulation and a lot of co-construction of the discourse. In red, you can also see that one student was self-correcting. So initially he says more good, and then later he has a bit of a laugh at himself and says, it will sound better, you know, and as he realized that he had made that mistake. The feedback was really positive. So I asked them to rank from 1 to 10, and the students just loved that activity. They really liked the opportunity to work together, to collaborate together, and to produce something that they felt was really professional. To improve on it, however, I felt like I needed to focus a little bit more on how to encourage the weaker students to contribute more, and how to support students if they were less confident than the other students. So what I did for the final task was, this was a poster presentation, and I encouraged the students to sort of divvy up some of the tasks to make sure that everybody had something that they could work on. And what it brought together was a whole range of things that I was hoping to get out of this task. Collaboration, contribution. The students were really engaged for, once again, a full 2 hours creating this poster presentation. It brought out real creativity in even which tools they were using and how to put together their poster. and it felt really professional. The poster that they put together seemed quite professional for a 2-hour task. Okay, once again, the academic language, and maybe this was because they were getting more used to doing tasks like this, but there's a lot more complexity and a lot more variety in their language. So you can see here in terms of the AWL, testing, production, expected, batch, shipping, prototype. And there was a lot of encouragement as well as they were getting towards the end of putting their poster together. You can see how they were feeling. They're saying, oh, this is cool. That looks perfect. It looks much better. It's way better now. So they were really excited about what they were doing. One student commented at the end of this activity that he really loved the exercise because not only was it helping him with his general communication skills in interacting with other students, but it was also a useful skill for his own work. Finally, these are some of the comments that the students gave for the end of course feedback. They were, yeah, a lot of them focused on things like the support they got from the teacher. They felt that they'd really learned many things, not just learning English, but how to interact online. And they felt that it enhanced their skills, not just in terms of English, but their ability to study a master's degree. So just to conclude, I think I'm probably a little bit over time. In terms of my first question about scaffolding activities and how to build confidence, I believe that the confidence will come from the support that they get, not just from the teacher, but from their peers and from themselves, some of that self-correction. I think that authenticity leads to more motivation, which will lead to some of that increased confidence. In terms of their preferences for activity, it was pretty clear that they wanted opportunities to collaborate, even when they're preparing for an individual task. They also wanted time to socialize. So not just doing an activity from the book, but they want to be in a breakout room with their friends in order to socialize and do things that they felt inspired by, right? Okay, thank you. That's enough for now. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks so much for that, Paul. I noticed in the chat quite a few people really liked the bridge building activity. I know the first time we saw this presentation, it was my favourite as well. All right, a few questions have come through for you. So Claire would like to know about the students' vocab needs. Was the vocab they needed specific to academic discourse or social interaction or topics or something else?
Yes, yes. So you'll notice that I haven't really put in any discourse analysis in terms of how they did their final presentation. And unfortunately, that's because that was only 2 weeks ago and I haven't had time to really look at how these activities have impacted on their final presentations. But what I felt was that, yes, it was more that complexity and academic language and technical language that they needed. Because their presentation is based on a research report where they're looking at something related to their own field. So it's not so much language like, today I'd like to introduce my topic to you, or signal language. It was more that sort of technical and academic language that they needed.
Okay. All right. Richard has commented that you used really interesting methodology. And his question is, were your students living with other people? How would you do this with students living on their own?
There was a bit of a mixture. There were some that were living by themselves. We had some students that were overseas as well. So yeah, most of them had at least a room that they could work in where there were no distractions. But it didn't seem to impact too much, other than I would say the student that was definitely living by themselves in Melbourne, away from family during the COVID lockdown. She was definitely a student that was wanting more of that social interaction than some of the other students that were living in shared accommodation. Okay. So I think it supported her in her mental health as well, to have some of that interaction in the breakout rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Denisha's question, did you do anything specific to encourage collaboration among students? Was there any language input, or was it organic?
I'd say it was fairly organic. So in terms of the actual setting up of the activities, like I said, with that third activity, I had noticed that one student wasn't interacting as much. So I didn't explain it that well. What I did do was use the chat function to interact directly with that student when I felt like maybe there was 5 or 6 minutes where the student hadn't contributed anything, and I'd sort of just encourage the student, hey, do you have anything to add to this? And that worked sometimes. It didn't work all the time. The other thing that I did do with that particular student was encouraged him to sort of summarize what the group had done at the end of the task. And that was sort of more ad hoc. I didn't pre-plan that, but because I hadn't anticipated that some students might be less collaborative than others. So that's probably one thing that I would try to work on. I probably haven't perfected yet, so.
Okay. There's quite a few more questions, Paul.
Okay.
We probably don't have time to go through them all now in this open forum, but would you mind popping into the Q&A section and just typing in your answers?
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, I'll just finish off this section with a comment that came through from Phil Chappell, who works at the Applied Linguistics and TESOL department at Macquarie University. He said, great project and excellent outcomes. In the discourse analysis you provided, I also noticed cumulative talk, where the students' ideas and search for words or expressions built on each other. Co-construction plus plus.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks so much, Paul.